Hello. Today I'm going to tie for you a clinger nymph. It's meant to imitate those mayfly nymphs that are kind of triangular shaped and they cling to the bottom of the rocks. You lift one out of the stream and you see them scurrying in all directions. And this one might be a little bigger than the ones I'm seeing this time of year, but it uses some interesting material in some interesting ways. So we're going to do this one on a size 16 fulling mill hook. I'm going to use these Lively Legz. These are for a 14 to 12, but I'm using them a little different than they were intended, and you'll see that as we go. I'm going to use some Partridge for both the tail and the aftershaft for the rear part of the body and gills. I have some brown acrylic dubbing, and I have these plastic eyes that I got out of the bargain bin in one of the fly shops a couple of years ago. And a piece of Goose Quill will be our wing case, and we're going to hold it all together with some 8/0 Uni-Thread in gray. So we have our hook and a vise, and I'll get the thread started. I'm going to start just behind the eye this time because I'm going to put eyes on this hook, and um, it's not like tying some of the other flies where you want to remind yourself to leave space. I need just enough space to come back over with that wing case at the end. So I'll go back a little ways, get a little bit of a thread base up front. I want to tie those plastic eyes in first. So I'll stop about a hook eye length behind there, and we'll get some cross wraps and get these things in place. So again, I don't finish this fly up behind the eye. I do need a little room there to pull the wing case over and attach it, but actually finish right behind these eyes when it's all said and done. So I'll fiddle around with these a little bit, get them centered and as square as I can. I like to do about 5 or 6 wraps in each direction, a couple of parachute wraps underneath to tighten things up. And they're not going to go anywhere after that. So one last push them around a little bit, get them in the right place. And a little super glue to kind of penetrate and make that thread kind of work as one unit. So that'll help keep these from twisting. And with those in place, we can work our way to the back, just in front of the bend. So I'm going to do a little thread bump there. I want to make sure those tail fibers spread out. And here we're showing that one of the partridge feathers, right? So there's a bundle of the fibers from the main feather that I'm going to use for the tail. And that tail might be a shank length, maybe a little more. And I didn't think I had quite enough, and more importantly, I didn't think I had quite enough of that barred effect. So I grabbed some of the other fibers that had that barring on them and added them to the top. These are thin fibers and they're wispy, and when they get wet, they kind of wash all together. So um, having extra fibers doesn't hurt anything. So work our way forward and trim off the butts. And we'll kind of cover those up. There was one long one I missed there, but it kind of got wrapped in, so no issues. So here's something I didn't lay out in the materials list. So I've done this a couple different ways. I only made a couple of these flies before I actually tied one for the camera, but I've done variations of these um, before, and they work well. But this is nothing more than a piece of 3/0 black thread, tying thread, doubled over, left it as a loop. And there's the other component here, this aftershaft from that partridge feather. So it's the little feather it kind of lays underneath. And what I'm going for here, I'm going to kind of wrap this from front to back, use that thread to counter wrap it to strengthen. These feathers are kind of a really cool material, but they're incredibly weak. And you'll see, I think I tear the tip off of this as I go here. So We'll get that loop of thread out of the way. Bump the camera in the process. And I'm going to use the rotary feature to wrap this in. Yeah, there we have it. I didn't quite grab enough of that feather. I was trying to get as much as I could out of it. I don't want to lose any length here because it's just long enough to do this size 16. So I'm wrapping it front to back. There are fibers kind of going in all directions, but that's not an issue. Kind of have to work our way around the hook point. That's not an issue because we're going to trim this. I want to trim it to length and trim it to shape. So let me get right now I'm feverishly hunting for my shepherd's hook. I want to put it in that loop and twist that thread. And it kind of rolled underneath something, so we found it. I'm twisting that up and I'll get a wrap over the butt end of that feather and just kind of counter wrap that or rib it going forward. And now when this gets wet, those wispy fibers kind of flow around in the water, look like gills moving, and then you have that black and gray effect with the rib from the thread. So I have the end of that tied down. We'll trim off the excess. And so a little bit about these. Last couple of fishing trips, I go out and I lift up some of the rocks, and you see the various caddis worms and flies and the ryax and some of the others underneath those rocks. But then you always see these little nymphs scurrying along too. And I did a version that was a beadhead version before, called an F15 or something. But I think this does a little better. This with the Aftershaft and the gills and what I'm doing here. I don't know. I just never leave well enough alone. I'm always trying to improve or use different materials. And so I came in, I trimmed it kind of flat on top, and I'm going to flip it over and do the same thing underneath. And I think I've used my snips on something. I was doing egg patterns the other day and I dulled them a little bit, so that egg yarn's hard on scissors. Keep that in mind. So there, now it's kind of flattened out. I want to give it a little bit of a trim on each side, leave these a little longer and maybe even give it a little of that triangular shape. The gills get shorter as you get closer to the tail. It's kind of like deer hair too. You could trim this forever. None of it really matters. It kind of washes back and fishes just fine, but you don't really see the rib until this fly gets wet, so. But trust me, it's under there. Okay, now this is some dubbing. My wife was doing some crocheting and she was cutting pieces off of the yarn. I looked at it. It was acrylic yarn. It kind of has that little bit of um, sparkle to it, and it was in the perfect color to imitate. The bugs that I keep seeing this time of year are mostly that dull, dirty gray. So this dubbing did a good job of matching the color, and I didn't want to let it go to waste. So I took the yarn, snipped it up into pieces, and put it in the coffee grinder, and this is what I came up with. So I wrap behind the eyes and kind of back to where we left off with the abdomen. And I'm tying in that quill segment and kind of working my way back to make sure that it's on top and laying flat so it folds over nice. And I like to build up a little bit of a diameter there. So here's the Lively Legz, and this is how they come. And I'm not going to use the front ones in this case. You can see they angle forward. They're about the same width as the eyes. I think in a perfect world I would have made my own eyes and made them a little narrower than what these were. Uh, but they're okay. They'll get by. So I snipped the back set of legs off. That's one of the variations I'm doing here. I'm going to just put a couple of cross wraps over that middle set of legs. And again, I fiddle around and spin these and whatever, but they get pushed into place. By the time you're done and you dub them and put in the second set, they get pushed into place, and they're pretty much exactly how I wanted them to come out. So we'll snip that front set off. I'll save those. You never know. Maybe I'll use them somewhere else for something. And do a couple of crisscrosses. Get myself behind that set of legs I just tied in. And I'm going to bring that back set of legs in. I snipped that stub out of the back because I didn't want to deal with it later. Sometimes when you're pulling those and trying to snip it, you pull your legs out of place. So, and part of the reason, I guess the reason I cut these apart is because I didn't want that space in between them. I wanted them to, if you look at these bugs, their legs are butted like right against each other. So that's the effect I was going for. So I did it by kind of overlapping and crisscrossing. They're not going to come out. They're going to be real durable. There won't be a problem with that. And there you see it. I kind of got the effect that I was looking for. And we only use, you'd probably noticed by now, so we're only using 2 sets. Um, I've said this before, trying to be cute or funny, that fish can't count, so they're not going to come back and say, hey, there's a set of legs missing, I'm not going to bite that. And I'm going to make another little dubbing noodle here and work my way forward. There's going to be a lot of thread showing now because we went over top of all that dubbing we put on before. And kind of fiddle around between the legs, work my way forward. Some of those little fibers will grab a leg every once in a while. And I'm going to come up between them just to get in front. And then I want to fill in most of the space right behind those eyes. And again, they're a little wider than I might have liked, or I should have used a little more dubbing and filled those in. But at the end of the day, I think this thing will fish. Like I said, I've done these. I've done them with bead chain and made my own eyes and been fooling around with stuff like this for a long time. And so here, I'm being a little finicky about this. You don't want to just grab the quill section and yank it and tie it down. You kind of have to lay it in place and you know fiddle with the tension a little bit to make sure you don't pull it into a narrow band. That's not what we want. So I'm going to fold that back, take a couple of wraps over it, and then I'm going to get behind the eyes, which is where I want to finish. And then same thing, I'm going to lay this back and make sure it stays spread out kind of nice. And put a couple of tight wraps to make sure it stays there, and we're almost done. So lay some Sally Hansen's Hard as Nails on the thread. And I do that because that way it lays against the bottom of the thread wraps too, so it kind of makes them all get cemented. Where if you just put a drop on top, you don't want to soak the whole fly with head cement. even though I'm going to come back and put some head cement on the quill sections. But there we go. One last good push and bend everything back where it belongs. And that's it. That's the profile I was going for. And I have the legs coming out kind of at the point, looking like they're butted against each other, like on the natural. And the gills, I think, are going to move around a little bit and add something to it. So I'm going to put a drop of head cement on the two sections of quill. And that's pretty much the fly. So like I said, I've done okay with other flies like this. I think these will do just as well. And it's just another reason to sit at the tying bench and be creative. So I hope you put a couple of these in your box and hope they help you out. And if you want to learn more about me, look me up on Amazon. And until next time, be safe.